Football season is back, baby, and you know what that means. Time to whip out your digital manager's hat and make your dream fantasy team compete with other teams online while watching your favorite teams throw it down on the field. Are you stuck wondering who you should be adding to your fantasy teams? Well, then worry not, friends, as we've got you covered. Here's every start, sit, sleeper, and bust you need to know. Starting off with what you need to keep an eye on. Fantasy football is all about knowing your matchups. Even if you draft your team with certain goals and intentions, that doesn't mean you determined your weekly lineup decisions by the order you picked your players in. You should always check who your players are playing and make sure you have the right guys in and the wrong guys out. It's still too early to be 100% sure on which matchups are going to be easy and which ones are going to be tough, but we can still make some educated guesses based on all the defensive stats, track records, and key offensive details we've been seeing. Knowing these kinds of things can help us minimize the impact of the stuff we don't know and can lead to better decisions being made. We'll be going through every hoop and highlighting all of the players who are obvious starts and sits. You should feel more comfortable with deciding who to start or sit with based on the info. After all, there's no better feeling than feeling comfortable with your fantasy lineup before the games start. First up, we've got the Pittsburgh Steelers versus the Cleveland Browns. For this matchup, you'll be needing to sit Amari Cooper out. If you intend to start Cooper, you're probably hoping for some decent work on 9 or so targets. He is at most a flex start in PPR and may end up compiling his way to some better numbers than Elijah Moore and Tyler Lockett, both players who we'd rather use in a half or non-PPR setting. If you want to use him, you're going to have to make Sterling Shepard and Jarvis Landry sit out the matchup. Cooper has mostly been lining up wide throughout the last 2 weeks. He's also managed to only run over 16 yards on just 4 out of his 61 routes. It's a safe bet to assume that he'll be needing a lot more targets and a touchdown to be a good choice for the fantasy leagues. Those are realistic possibilities, as so far as the Steelers have allowed 3 touchdowns, an almost 70% catch rate, and averaged about 4.79 yards after catches to its outside receivers throughout their first 2 games. Next up, we've got the Buffalo Bills versus the Miami Dolphins. For the Bills, we're going to have to make Dawson Knox sit this match out. While Knox remains a streaming tight end with much touchdown or bust potential, we'd rather put Logan Thomas, Irv Smith, and even Tyler Conklin on our starting lineup in the PPR leagues. So far, the Dolphins have allowed a 78% completion rate, as well as 200 yards taken, the second most in the whole league, to the opposing tight ends. However, most of those yards went to Mark Andrews, and Knox just isn't even in the same class as him. Though the matchup has been very favorable for Knox in his past games against the Dolphins, even when he manages to score on them, he's still maxed out at just 11 PPR points. In the same matchup, we're also marking the quarterback, Tua Tagovailoa, as a bust candidate for the Dolphins. Owners hoping to start Tagovailoa are hoping that he lands enough passes to fall into good production against some of the league's top defensive players, minus a couple of their starters. While that's a reasonable estimate, it's still just as reasonable to expect Tagovailoa to struggle to perform at his best while under pressure with some turnovers. We prefer safer quarterbacks in more favorable matchups, such as Matthew Stafford, Kirk Cousins, and Joe Burrow to Tagovailoa. However, the other passers without the same level of firepower in tough matchups also shouldn't be started over the Dolphins quarterback. This won't be an easy matchup for Tagovailoa. We're not saying that he's a mess, but when he's blitzed, he's far less effective than when he isn't, and he's much worse against zone coverage. Let's take a look at our preferred lineup for Kansas City Chiefs versus the Indianapolis Colts. Juju Smith-Schuster is our pick if you need a starter for your team. Schuster is definitely the more touchdown-needy option for non-PPR plays, and that's something we shouldn't be counting on. However, you should start him in the PPR formats, especially due to his 6-catch potential. He's worth trusting in such leagues over the likes of Marquise Brown, Amari Cooper, and Terry McLaurin. Captain Gus Bradley will be bringing his zone-heavy Colt scheme to try to keep Patrick Mahomes from throwing deep, and in those kinds of situations, we prefer short area targets such as Schuster to come through for a volume-driven stat line. Time to bring Juju to his feet and on the field. For our next entry, we've got the New Orleans Saints versus the Carolina Panthers. Jarvis Landry is the expected sleeper for this matchup. While we wouldn't get too comfy with Landry on our lineup, the matchup suggests that he'll be in the flex conversation in PPR formats with a super sneaky DFS play. While everyone will be busy talking about Chris Olave's 300-plus air yards, we'd rather take a chance on the safer secondary Saints wide receiver. Plus, we've also seen the return of the old Jameis Winston back, if only for a week. Winston went ham with all of the deep throws, averaging around 13.22 air yards with pass attempts, an average that tops all others on the roster among the starters. We're betting that Winston's coaches managed to reel him in with some shorter yet quicker throws, which are much better suited for a player like Landry, even though the guys got some deep targets in Week 1. On the other hand, we've got the Houston Texans versus the Chicago Bears. For all of our Texans out there, we suggest you put Damon Pierce on the starting lineup. The rookie has already been evolving as a tackle-beating rusher, so anything that helps improve his O-line should help find him some space before contact and fuel his efficiency. However, a few runs to the edges should benefit him too. Pierce has taken some positive steps forward lately, and while his vision and patience aren't quite there yet, he's still shown off his power and burst on a few of his recent runs. Plus, he also got some help from the improving Texans' offensive line. For the Bear lineup, we'd recommend putting the wide receiver Darnell Mooney to work. With his best matchup as of yet right in front of him, Mooney's a safer starter for non-PPR formats than full PPR, but he's still worth a slight nudge ahead of players like Sterling Shepard, Jarvis Landry, Jacoby Myers, and Josh Palmer where catches don't count. This may very well be the game that makes or breaks Mooney. It's the first Chicago matchup of the year where Justin Fields won't be under serious pressure, which is why Fields won't be throwing to anyone, not just Mooney. But make no mistake, Mooney is definitely getting open and would probably have much better numbers already if only Fields had some better protection. That should be the case in their matchup against the Texans, who are currently the 25th ranked team in pass rush pressure rate despite only being tied for 10th place in blitzes called. And lastly, we've got the Detroit Lions versus the Minnesota Vikings. For the Lions, we'd prefer TJ Hawkinson to sit this one out. At the very best, Hawkinson is a low-end starter in PPR with some hope that he'll manage to catch more than half of his targets for the season. However, we're still far more excited to start the likes of Tyler Higbee and Gerald Everett instead. Though Hawkinson still has a decent target share throughout these last couple of weeks, he still only caught half of those targets with an average of 9.14 yards gained per grab. He also hasn't been running downfield much. Out of the 60 routes that he's run so far, only 10 of them have been 11+ yards downfield, and only one of them resulted in a target. This means that he's much more of a short area safety valve for people like Jared Goff, and not necessarily a primary focal point. For the Vikings, Kirk Cousins is our choice for a starter. Cousins has a lot of bounce-back potential in what appears to be a high-scoring game. His stunning track record and nice receiving core made him a worthy start ahead of players such as Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, and Joe Burrow. A matchup against the Lions should work out well for him, as he'll be in his home field against a pass defense that has already let up 3 touchdowns and allowed 337 yards gained just last week to Carson Wentz. Cousins has also managed to put up 23 fantasy points minimum in 3 of his last 4 matchups against the Lions, so he's a no-brainer start for this matchup as well. That's a wrap for this video. What are your thoughts on our lineup? Would you have picked anything else? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.